All right, let's take a look at question 2 from the final exam for fall 2016. So once again, I'm going to go through the question, talking you through how I would approach it if I were taking this as an exam, rather than giving you the full detailed explanations that you'll see in the solutions online. So really trying to help you think through how to approach exam taking. So let's get going with that. So here we go. The graph below is going to show us the demand curve. So we clearly see the demand curve here. Short run supply curve, so SSR, just keeping track of what each curve means. We've got a long run supply curve, SLR. So once again, just keeping track of what everything is. The market is perfectly competitive. So that's a really key piece of information for me here. And it's currently in its long run equilibrium at T0 and P0. Right? So those are important things for knowing whether we're dealing with competition or oligopoly or monopoly here. And so I know I'm starting at this point right here, starting at that long run equilibrium, P0, T0. All right, so what's going to happen in this question? Suppose the cost of tacos ingredients drops, reducing both marginal cost and average cost for all taquerias. So I'm going to keep track of this on the side over here. So we're going to have our marginal cost go down, and we've got our average cost going down. So what are the implications of that here? Before I even get into parts A through C, let's just do a quick little graph on the side for my own purposes to think about what an individual firm's cost curves just did. So if I had a traditional marginal cost curve like this, average cost like that, well, this is saying that now I have new lower marginal costs and new lower average costs. So my marginal costs are doing that, and my average costs are doing that. All right, so that covers all the information that we're given up top. We've sort of got that all taken care of. So now in part A, on the graph below, show how this reduction in ingredient prices will affect the equilibrium price of tacos and equilibrium quantity of tacos in the short run. So I want to make certain, identifying the question, whether we're talking short or long run. So here we know we want to do short run. Clearly label any relevant points or additional curves you include on the graph. All right, well, I know this short run supply curve comes from adding up all the individual firm supply curves, right? And so individual firms' supply curves are their marginal cost curve above their shutdown price, the minimum of their average variable cost. So this would have been my old sort of shutdown price over here, right? That's where supply is at that axis. Well, if all my marginal cost curves are shifting down to the right for the individual firms, all those supply curves are, so when I add them up, that's also shifting down to the right. So I know I've got to put on a new short run supply curve that looks like that, right? All right, so I've got my curve on. I've labeled it as supply in the short run prime. So make certain it's clear that that's the short run curve here. All right, and what we're trying to show, though, is the equilibrium price of tacos and equilibrium quantity in the short run. So we're looking for short run intersecting demand. That's going to give me my new short run equilibrium quantity of tacos. All right, so once again, I want to label it clearly as short run. And so my price of tacos here is going to be this new equilibrium, P prime. Right? I know that P prime's got to be down and to the right here because we've shifted the supply curve down, demand's not moving. So if we're going to have more tacos, the only way people are going to buy those is if they're sold at a lower price. Okay, but that's also clear from seeing that intersection. So I want to double check, is there anything else I should sort of label in that new short run equilibrium? Well, I've got my price, I've got my quantity, I've shown what that new curve is, there's no change to the demand curve, nothing else there I can really label, right? Okay. So now we look at part B here. So how does this reduction in the ingredient prices affect equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity in the long run? All right. So now I want to think about long run. If I looked out to my graph, it'd be a mistake to sort of see this long run supply curve and leave it at that. The reason that's a mistake is because we know the average cost curve has changed. So one advantage of me sort of writing up here in the margin for myself that average cost drop and writing my quick little reference graph for the individual firm is that that's going to remind me now, when I get to part B here, that wait a second, the break-even price has dropped on my little graph there. All right, so this used to be the break-even price. Now the minimum the average cost curve is lower, so we have a lower break-even price. And so what I'm going to do is draw in a new long-run supply curve that corresponds to that lower break-even price. So still going to be horizontal, still going to be at a break-even price. It's just that new break-even price is now lower. So I'm using primes here to make certain I identify why it's new. I've got that new curve drawn in, clearly labeled. Having break-even price written out over here tells the person grading the exam that you know why this thing is lower, right? So it's not an arbitrary decision on your part. You're showing your reasoning by the way you've labeled it, right? Okay, so we're looking for the long-run equilibrium. Long run is just where long-run supply intersects demand. So we're going to find that intersection. I'm going to label that as my new long-run equilibrium. So I'm going to call it T prime long run. We want to be really careful and clear with these labels. And so over here, this is going to be my long-run equilibrium price. I've actually already labeled that as the break-even price, but the question is asking for equilibrium price, right? So I'm just going to be clear that I demonstrate that I know that's the price in the long run. So I'm just going to say equal to P long run prime there. Okay? And so that now covers everything I might need to have for that long-run equilibrium. I've shown the price, I've shown the quantity, I've labeled both of those, right? And I've clearly labeled that new supply curve that I made to find that new equilibrium. So that's going to cover part B here. So finally we have part C. Explain how, right, and why the number of taquerias will change over time as a result of the decreasing ingredient prices. So my graph is already telling me how, right? So we know from our graph that the short run number of tacos is going to increase, right? And we also know that in the long run, we're going to reach an even larger number of tacos, given the way I've drawn things here, right? So I want to answer consistent with the way I've drawn my graph. There's other ways I could have drawn in this short run supply curve that would lead to different answers. But if I start talking about those ways and my graph shows this way, that's creating inconsistency in my answer. That means I'm internally incorrect in that answer. So I want to make certain that my answer is consistent with what I've done in the prior parts. Okay? So given those prior parts, we know that in the short run, number of tacos is going to go up and price is going to go down because firms' costs went down, right? Leading to them to supply more tacos at any given price. And this leads to more tacos being sold at a lower price than before in short run equilibrium, right? So then when that happens, this is still now above the new equilibrium break-even price, right? And so that means firms are making positive profits. Well, new taquerias are going to open up, seeing those positive profits, and then that's going to shift short-run supply even further out, leading to even more tacos, even lower prices, until we hit long-run equilibrium. So as I write this out, I need to capture both of those elements, right? So in the short run, right? So in the short run, and I can abbreviate SR if I'm running out of time on the exam here, right? Since costs went down, existing taquerias, right? And I can just write firms to save myself time on the exam. So existing firms are willing to supply more tacos at lower prices, right? So we move down and right along demand curve to more tacos at lower prices. All right, so there's my short run description, right? So how the number of taquerias will change over time, right? Well, we didn't get any change in taquerias yet. It's short run, so we're just leading to lower quantities, lower prices, but that's important for why more taquerias are going to enter in, right? And so I'm explaining what's going to happen, right? So I'm explaining that we're getting more tacos, lower prices, and why, because those costs went down, all right? So now we're ready for our long run piece here, all right? So I can write in the long run, or let's actually call it medium run, okay? That short run equilibrium of P short run prime, right, leads to positive profits for each firm, right, because P prime SR is greater than the new equilibrium break-even price, right? So I can save myself a little time with notation here and there, right? So instead of writing out equilibrium break-even price, since I've already identified that on my graph above, I can just write it as PBE prime, a lot quicker than writing the new break-even price, right? Okay, so given those positive profits, more firms will want to enter. As they enter, this will shift short-run supply to the right, lowering equilibrium price until we hit the new break-even price, so PBE prime. One more room here. Until we hit PBE prime and profits equal 0, so firms stop entering. All right, so the key thing is, in my answer, I identified what's going to happen to the number of firms. It's going to increase in the medium run until we hit a new long-run equilibrium, and then it's going to stop, right? And I explained why, because that short-run equilibrium price is leading to positive profits. Seeing those positive profits, new firms want to enter into the industry, right? So had you just said, you know, price continues to go down till we get more firms, that doesn't fully explain why. You have to get to that profit piece there. Right? So those written explanations, they take a bit more time, and one way to save time on those written explanations is to just walk through the explanation in your head, understand what the key elements of it are, and just write those key elements out. Don't ramble trying to figure out the key elements as you write, because writing's inherently slow, right? Thinking this through is a lot faster without writing out all the dead ends first. So make the argument in your head first, really convince yourself of that argument, and then think about, now, how do I clearly write that out in just 3 sentences, 4 sentences, right? Because doing that is going to save you a ton of time in an exam relative to writing out 10 sentences that are in a roundabout way, kind of getting to the right answer. All right. That is everything we were asked to do in question 2 here.